Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. As-salatu was-salamu alayka ya sayyidi ya Rasulullah wa ala alika wa ashabika ya sayyidi ya Nurullah. Respected viewers and listeners, friends, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu wa maghfiratuhu. I want to talk about my master, the most holy Prophet Muhammad sallallahu ta'ala alayhi wa alihi wa sallam. Fidaka abi wa ummi ya sayyidi ya Rasulullah. May my mom and dad be ransomed for your sake, O Apostle of Allah sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sallam. It is very necessary for believing Muslims to frequently invoke salat and salam upon my master, the Holy Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. This is one of the salient features of Islam, and particularly of the Sunni madhab, Ahl-Sunnati wal Jama'ah. Respected viewers and listeners, when the wahi used to descend upon my master sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the revelation from heaven, then what was the physiological effect that could be sensed and perceived by those that were in his vicinity? It is mentioned by Sayyiduna Umar al-Faruq radiallahu ta'ala anhu, the second successor of the most holy Prophet Muhammad sallallahu ta'ala alayhi wa alihi wasallam, that when the wahi was coming upon my master sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, that he could hear the buzz, something that's like the buzzing of a swarm of honeybees near his face, which proved that the phenomena of wahi, objective reality, was not something that is to such an extent of having, you have to only have blind belief upon it and just accept that what the Prophet is saying. It could also be sensed to some extent. Could also be sensed to some extent. And the Sahaba radiallahu ta'ala anhum, they would be gathered around the Holy Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. They would be gathered around him, and then suddenly the wahi would descend upon him. And when the wahi was descending upon him, he would lower his head, something like this. And the wahi is coming upon him, he would lower his head and close his eyes. And so the Sahaba, they would emulate that action. They would also, all of them would suddenly become quiet, and they would lower their head, just as the Prophet ﷺ was lowering his head. And then when the wahi was completed, he would lift up his head again, and they would all lift up their head again. This was the degree to which they emulated the Prophet ﷺ, and also it was done out of a reverence for the wahi that was descending upon the Holy Prophet ﷺ. Respected viewers and listeners, it is mentioned other physiological changes would happen in the Prophet when he was receiving the wahi. His complexion would change, and he would become sort of pale. And sometimes he would begin to sweat. He would, if the wahi was very heavy and very powerful, he would begin to perspire. And the perspiration of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the Sahaba, they mention that his perspiration, it had such a pleasant fragrance to it, to such an extent that they would collect the drops of his perspiration and use it as a perfume. They would literally use it as a perfume. It would the best perfume they ever came up with, just from the perspiration of this, one of his mu'jiza, one of his miracles, that his perspiration didn't have any bad odor to it, unlike the perspiration of other humans. It had a pleasant fragrance to it, a very pleasant fragrance to it, that they would use as a perfume. They would perfume themselves and their clothes with his perspiration, and they would collect it into small glass containers. Respected viewers and listeners, it's also mentioned that the Holy Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, when the wahi would descend upon him, he would begin to quake and tremble. He would begin to quake and tremble from the presence of the awesome angels and the coming of the revelation from heaven. These are the words of God Himself. It causes the believer to tremble. His heart is trembling. His body is quaking. This is one of the signs of a prophet, that when he is receiving revelation, and no different in the case of our master, the Holy Prophet Muhammad sallallahu ta'ala alayhi wa alihi wasallam. Sayyidina Umar radiallahu ta'ala anhu, he would cover the Prophet with a sheet, with a sort of a garment or a cloak or a blanket or something of that nature. He would cover the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam while he was receiving the revelation. And the Prophet would go into sort of a trance-like state. He would go into a sort of another level of consciousness, into the world of revelation. So he was not exactly aware of what is going on in his surroundings. He was in a different state, the state of receiving revelation. So, respective viewers and listeners, these are the physiological signs of divine revelation, of wahi, that the Muslim should be aware of. Until next time, Assalamu alaikum.